Hey guys, welcome to welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Isaiah 55, and what a rich chapter this is. So I'm going to jump right in because we have been discussing the prophecy, God calling by name Cyrus, the king of the Persians, who will do his will and issue the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem after the 70-year exile. This is an astounding prophecy because remember, this happens about 170 years before Cyrus issues that decree. And so I want to just again re-emphasize how important prophecy is when the true prophecy, not these sham prophets today, but when God prophesies and he does so to establish that he is God, he speaks the end from the beginning, and we see this prophecy comes to pass. Now, as I said with prophecy, one of the most interesting thing about prophecy, and I'm talking about biblical prophecy, again, I loathe these false prophets, these people who heap titles on themselves. And the going thing today is to call yourself an apostle or a prophet. Okay. But true prophecy, the biblical prophecy, God establishes, he watches over his word to perform it. And this is how we can know. Because I oftentimes think we are challenged by science. And I think I'm going to get to science in doing this chapter because I'm taking a slow crawl through this chapter. But I will deal with science in this chapter. And you'll see what I mean when I get to it. But we are challenged oftentimes with God is absent. God is invisible, or and then people will say, "Well, it seems like, well, why doesn't God show up like he did in the Old Testament?" So then we go further with this, and people have a hard time understanding. When I say people, there are a lot of people, and this is kind of the term that they are what they're doing, deconstructing from Christianity. They're losing their faith, and you see, and maybe this has always been happening, but I think, of course, through social media, we're able to see it in real time more. Okay, so it seems like maybe it's a lot, but I think we've always had it. And then, of course, they turn to what they call science. Like I say, I'll deal with that later in a moment. But in the deconstruction, one of the things they're doing, of course, is they're just not saying we're leaving the faith, we no longer believe in Christianity, but they are now on uh, um, um, uh, purposeful um, uh, to destroy the ideology of God. Okay, so they say things, like God is a monster, God is evil, God doesn't keep his word, God's a liar, blah 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 blah. Of course, they don't talk about a whole lot of other stuff, and of course, this is not about necessarily them. But I think it's important that we know the mindset of what is going on in our day. And when I say, for example, I don't have a problem with being challenged with my faith. I think as Christians, If someone can challenge your faith and ruin you, you don't have true faith. But we should be able to answer, right? We should be able to answer. We should be able to give an answer of the reason of the hope that lies within us. And some of the answers are, regardless if I say they're silly or not, you can say they're valid questions, right? So why is God invisible or not speaking? Well, and then you add that to that God simply wants us to believe his word. And then this becomes a condition for salvation. And so this is where a lot of objection will come in at, which is kind of silly because regardless, it's God's plan. But to strengthen my faith, one of the ways I can say that to strengthen my faith is I see how God's word, okay, plays out. And thus, when God speaks, I know he's real because he speaks. And I say that by faith. Not science, but I say that by faith. So, full circle, this is a good example of this. That God has given us the evidence that we can follow and say, he is God. That his promises are true. And again, I'm going to kind of unfold some of this stuff as we go on. I'm not by any means through with this because I think it's important. I guess, one of the things about, of course, social media and then the algorithms of social media, of course, when you click on something, it starts flooding your page with what? Story after story after story. So I get them because I watch them. Like, so for example, these deconstruction ex-Christians who are now atheists, I get flooded with them because I don't mind listening to them. Now, for example, my wife doesn't get them at all because she's not going to click on them. Okay, she's just not going to click on them. But I get them. So that's their algorithms, right? So I get to hear their arguments. And then I can weigh out their arguments. And some of their arguments, as I said, is silly because they're going to say, well, I don't. Some of the reasons why they say I'm an ex-Christian is because, well, God lets babies get destroyed, or God, you think about the war that's going on right now. I don't believe in God because he allowed that. Okay, you don't believe in God. God doesn't exist. The war is still going on. And that's just kind of, see, and that to me is a testament of, as Paul says, it's a testament of the damnation that they are want to occur for themselves. And truthfully, it's not about those things anyway. Truthfully, it's just they don't like God. They hate God. And you peel back all of these things right here. I was listening to, and I did respond on the video. I've responded to a video that was put together that says how evolution disproves God. And the guy was saying how you look at all of these evidence, so-called evidence in the universe, and it doesn't even make a good case of that. That he says that as you look at the universe, how insignificant man is. And that's why I don't believe in a God. Excuse me. So it's kind of, to me, silly. But anyway, and I know I'm kind of going off on this because I said I wanted to explore these thoughts as they converge here. When I read the Bible, my faith is strengthened because I come across stuff like this. Let's bring it up. That our faith is strengthened by I'm looking. Okay, our faith is strengthened by fulfilled prophecy, one of the ways. In other words, God said it. Why can I believe God here? In other words, why do I believe, one, that Jesus died for my sins? Okay, so what are the faith building elements for that? Right? In other words, we have a group of men, uneducated men, that started in Jerusalem and spread to the entire world. Eventually, that was written down on paper, in books, right? The Bible. Now, some people say, is it just reading that? And the answer is yes, because what am I reading? The testimony of Jesus Christ. But it's not only the testimony of Jesus Christ, it's everything that he said. So, for example, the sinful nature of man. Science doesn't deal with that. Science can't deal with that. Some of these ex-Christians who claim there is no sin, you sin against your own standard, proving you are a sinner. Okay? Think about that. You just take the Bible out the way. Guess what? If they're honest about it, they're going to say we sin against our own standard. Forget God's standard. I'm sinning against my own standard. They're just not honest enough to admit that. But secondly, the claims of God. And that's it, which strengthens my faith. The claims of God. The love of God is one, but you go back to the claims of God, and this prophecy is one of the keys here, because if I have faith that Jesus is coming back, because I can look back on the fulfilled prophecies. That's what I'm saying. The fact that Jesus was born, well, I can go back, and we're coming up, of course, in Isaiah 53, that will prophesy Jesus' birth, the death and burial and resurrection. All right, let's bring it up, because I am kind of rambling. I do realize. I'm going to go back and I'm going to read, but I'm going to start again, as I said, in chapter 44, and this time I'll read all the way through. It says, "This is what the Lord your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb, says. I am Yahweh, who made everything, who stretched out the heavens by myself, who alone spread out the earth, who destroys the omens of false prophets, who make fools of diviners, who confound the wise and make their knowledge foolishness, who confirms the message of his servants, who fulfills the counsel of his messengers, who says to Jerusalem, she will be inhabited. To the cities of Judah, they will be rebuilt, and I will restore her ruins, who said to the depths of the seas, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers, who says to Cyrus, my shepherd, he will fulfill my pleasure, and says to Jerusalem, she will be rebuilt, and of the temple its foundations will be laid. And this prophecy will be fulfilled, as I said, from the writing of this prophecy, about 170 years. So you read about this in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, which are post-Babylonian books. So the point is, so Isaiah is a historical document. So we got the history of the dating of the dating of the writings of Jeremiah, as well as 170 years from now, the writings of Nehemiah in Ezra. The prophecies were fulfilled. Verse 45, it says, the Lord says to Cyrus, his anointed, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, to disarm kings, to open the doors before him, and the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and level the uneven places. I will shatter the bronze doors and cut the iron bars in two. I will give you the treasures of darkness and riches from the secret places, so that you may know that I am Yahweh, the God of Israel, calls you by your name. I call you by your name because of Jacob my servant and Israel my chosen one. I give a name to you, though you do not know me. I am Yahweh, and there is no other God. There is no God but me. I will strengthen you, though you don't know me. Now I want to come back to this statement. I am Yahweh, and there is no other God. There is no God but me. I'm going to come back to that statement. Verse 6. So that all may know from the rising of the sun unto its setting that there is no one but me. I am Yahweh. There is no other. Look at verse 7. I form light and create darkness. I make success and create disaster. Now I'm going to stop and come back because I have a couple of thoughts I want to deal with here. Go back to this verse 5 when he says, I am Yahweh, there is no other. There is no God but me. So let me prep this for the next study. As I said, because I want to converge science with this, as I've already done. God proclaims that he made the earth, the heavens and the earth. He said, there is no God but me. There is no other God. There is no one but me. He said this over and over again. Verse 5, verse 6, there is no God but me. So this is God's proclamation. So my challenge always is, how has science disproved that God doesn't exist? To the atheist, how does science disprove that God doesn't exist? Which is kind of an astounding statement when you say God doesn't exist. Where is the scientific proof of that? And I say that because of the scientific, when you look at the science, and by the way, what they say, we follow the evidence. Okay, and a lot of atheists will say today they cannot definitively say that there is no God. They just say we haven't found evidence of one. And fair enough. Watch this though. So God declares there is no God. And at this point, here I want to interject. When we talk about then other religions, so why do other religions exist? And I also made this kind of interesting thing to me. Why did religious, if God doesn't exist, think about this now. If God doesn't exist and you follow the evolutionary trail, right? You go from apes and then you go from apes to then humanoids. If God doesn't exist in the first place, why would the concept of God form? Who formed it, in other words? Who formed it if God doesn't exist? So who formed it if God doesn't exist? Just a question. I don't expect an answer. But man-made religions, which is kind of always interesting, that something seems to be in man that he must worship something, which has always been the sin of pagan worship and the sin of any other religion. By the way, even within Christianity. Even within Christianity. So where did the idea of God come from? Now God says there is no other God. So it comes from the imagination of men. That translated into them building pagan statues, deities, the ideologies that they speak. All right, I'm going to deal with that more in the next study, obviously. So don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.